everybody, welcome back to Winamac Hockey, where today we are continuing our series called Offseason Analysis, and today we are talking about the San Jose Sharks, who are in a little bit of a salary cap issue right now. If you all are new to the channel, I am Dom DeBomb Heater, joined by Jake the Snake Armstrong and Matt the Brat Cleveland. Please be sure to hit that subscribe button, and let's get to it. Alright guys, so the San Jose Sharks last season finished with an overall record of 21, 28, and 7, which has landed them the 7th overall pick in this year's draft, which is a pretty good, decent pick. Whether they decide to trade it or use it, we'll have to find out. But here's the issue, guys. They have $10 million in cap space, which is not great for a team that missed the playoffs. There's not much that they can really do this offseason, unless they decide to use the route of trading or just strictly going with the draft and skipping out on free agency. So, Jake, let's come over to you. How in the world did the San Jose Sharks end up in such a salary cap crisis?
All right, so obviously the big one is acquiring Erik Karlsson in that trade. Not only did they acquire him and sign him to that huge contract, making $11.5 million forever, basically. They also gave up a ton of their future. To acquire Erik Karlsson, it was actually Erik Karlsson and Francis Perron that they got. You know, big blockbuster Francis Perron. But they gave up Josh Norris, Chris Tierney, Rudolph Balcers, Dylan DeMello, a second-round pick, a 2020 first-round pick, a 2021 second-round pick, which could have been a first-rounder if the Sharks made the Stanley Cup Final in 2019, which tells you the direction that they thought they'd be going. And then a 2022 conditional pick if he was traded to the Eastern Conference that year, which is kind of funny because that stipulation was put in because Ottawa just traded them Mike Hoffman, and they specifically traded him across the conference because they didn't want Mike Hoffman anywhere near their division. And then the Sharks turned around and same day traded Mike Hoffman to the Panthers in Ottawa's division, or in their conference. So that's why that stipulation is in there, which is kind of funny. Which, as we know now, doesn't even matter because they signed him, Erik Karlsson, that is. So yeah, signed him to that big contract, gave away their entire future, all those picks, and Josh Norris is a really good prospect, so they gave him up. And other than that, if you look at their draft picks that they've had, they haven't had a whole lot of good ones. They haven't even had they've never won a lottery or anything. That 7th overall you mentioned is their best pick since 2003, I think. They also had the 7th overall pick. And they haven't really done a lot with their picks. 2018, 21st overall, they picked Ryan Merkley. 2017, 19th overall, Josh Norris. 2012, 17th overall, Thomas Hertl. That was a good pick. I'll skip 2010. 2007, 9th overall, Logan Couture. 2005, their second best pick since 2003, was 8th overall. They picked Devin Setaguchi. And he actually was traded along with their 2010 pick that I said I skipped over. That was Charlie Coyle. It was Setaguchi and Coyle traded for Brent Burns, which is another large contract on that team. So a mix of not trading well and signing bad players is sort of how they got in this situation.
And so in addition to Erik Karlsson, who's making $11.5 million per year, who else on that team is making, let's say, over $6 million? Who else has some big contracts sitting over there in San Jose?
All right, so let's look at their big guns. You've got on the offense, Evander Kane, $7 million. Logan Couture, $8 million. Timo Meier is right there, not exactly that 7 you mentioned, but $6 million for him. Thomas Hertl is 5.265, so I personally think that's a great contract. Kevin Labanc is 4.725, which is a bit pricey for him. But then the defense is where things just go AWOL. Erik Karlsson at $11.5 million, Brent Burns $8 million, Mark Edward Vlasic $7 million a year for several years still. All these long-term contracts.
Oh, wow. I mean, you probably listed up the entire cap space that they have right there just in those players alone. Matt, okay, so let's come over to you here. If you're the GM, what are you trying to do in order to get over this salary cap crisis? Because if you don't do anything, it seems as if you're going to have to just wait until all these contracts run out or start buying people out, but you don't really have the cap space for that. Matt, so what are you doing if you're the GM of that team?
Well, it's a very sticky situation. I mean, Jake pointed it out. There's really not much they can go. I mean, with how many contracts there are, people making a crap ton of money, and it really comes down to this point. There's players that you should keep. There's players that you really want to get rid of but can't. And there's players where it's like it's in between, but you can't get rid of it anyway because of contracts. So it's a very sticky situation. I think at this point, with the way their team is going, I mean, obviously it looks like a rebuild is on the way. If it's not already in the way, I mean, this kind of feels like a rebuild with how they're playing, but with the salary cap that they have and the amount of players on big contracts, to their eyes, it doesn't seem like they're in a rebuild. I think they really need to get on that path, and that really comes down to really getting rid of some of these players that I know it's going to be tough to do. They're probably going to have to attach draft picks onto some of these large contracts just to get them off the team, and it's really going to come down to a lot of these older players. They're going to have to find new homes because this team is not working together. None of them are working together. I mean, this is a team who is one of the worst scoring teams in the NHL. I mean, their penalty kill is pretty good. It's around mid-pack, but that's really the only saving grace they have from being just a god-awful team. I mean, their offense in general is one of the lowest scoring. Their power play is almost dead last. Their face-off percentage is terrible. Like, everything about this team is screaming rebuild. If they had the salary cap, they'd be able to rebuild. But I think it's really the wheels are starting to turn towards that situation.
Yeah, and I beg the question here because you say, like, you got to get rid of some of these older guys. With Seattle coming into the league and the expansion draft being days away now, which is really exciting, does San Jose, can they leave any of these guys unprotected and hope Seattle takes them? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think a lot of the teams now, they've been sort of asking the players if they'll waive any no movement clause, and a lot of times the players are saying yes. So I think really any player, like, do you really want to stay in San Jose? I think if they asked any player, they'd be okay waiving the clause. Pretty much anybody can be left unprotected, in my opinion. But does Seattle want to take anybody? I don't think so.
It's true. That's a good point. All right, hey, so let's reflect on some of these guys. We talked about the contracts they have, but I mean, some people out there may say, well, what are they producing? What do the numbers look like? So Jake, let's come back to Erik Karlsson. Do you have some stats for us as to how many points that some of these guys are getting? Like who led the team in points, all that kind of stuff?
All right, so I can give you Erik Karlsson's stats. He had 8 goals and 14 assists, 22 points. He was a -18 in 52 games played, which is not good, but it's not quite as bad as Marc-Edouard Vlasic making that $7 million for his 1 goal, 5 assists, and 6 points to go along with a -8 in 51 games played. On the positive side, Evander Kane had a great year. If I go over to him, he had 22 goals and 27 assists. That's 49 points and a -1 in 56 games played, which is a full season this year. That's pretty good. Almost a point per game. You could count on him to play in every game, and that's a lot of distractions for him. You know, he had the whole gambling thing going on. I think he's going to have an even better year next year. I could see him putting up 82 points in 82 games. I could see that for him.
Matt, how about you? Feel free to jump in here. Do you have any other stats do you think we should be aware of the play of some of these guys that are making a ton of money?
Well, it doesn't help the fact that Erik Karlsson is making $500,000 per point right now, so that's not really working out for their situation. But I would say that they do have a saving grace in the fact that, yeah, Evander Kane's having a really good season. I do agree with Jake. He definitely has a chance to be very good next year. And I look at another guy like Thomas Hertl. I mean, the guy had 19 goals and 24 assists, 43 points in 53 games. That's not bad. Plus his faceoff percentage was at 55%, which is pretty dang good for a center in this league right now. So he's definitely a bright spot on that team. There's another guy, Timo Meyer, who had a really good year. I mean, they have a couple of young guys like Mario Ferraro. He's a 22-year-old defenseman. He had 22 points in 56 games, which isn't bad as well. I mean, there's a lot of really good young guys, or maybe not a lot, but there's definitely some young guys that they can build from this year. And there are a couple guys who they had to bring up because of how bad the team was, and that really performed and did well for them. And I think with a young coach, it makes sense that they're going to keep going with these young guys, and they're going to have that veteran group and people like Evander, Kane, and players like Logan Couture, who had a decent season, and they're going to build through that there and keep it going. Well, they got to get rid of these bad guys with bad contracts.
Yeah, I think Matt brings
ahead,
up a great point. Sorry there, Dom. One big hole. Like I think we agree that offense doesn't look bad. Sure, you're putting a lot of money into it, but the players aren't terrible. That's a decent core, and the young guys there's some bright spots there. A big hole in that lineup is Martin Jones, who had 3.28 goals against average and a .896 save percentage. And for somebody making $5.75 million, that's just not good enough. They need to find a gap in the crease.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. Do they have any young guys in their system, maybe some that in the AHL that potentially came up or might have a chance at this?
I looked at their prospects, and they're all kind of bad. Ryan Merkley's okay. He played for the Barracuda last season, but he's a defender. Other than that, their prospects are going to stay minor league guys pretty much.
Even the goaltenders as well?
Yeah, I didn't see anybody that really stood out. I know there's going to be some people watching this are going to comment, what is he talking about? So-and-so is a great goalie. He's going to be a god. He's going to win the Vezina. No, they don't have any good prospects. I'm sorry to break your heart.
So do you think that potentially they try to find a goalie in the draft? It sounds like maybe you guys think that goaltender's the way that San Jose is going to look in this draft. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think there is definitely one goaltender that they have to get with that first round pick. With them picking as high as they are, even if they have to jump over some other teams to do it, I think they have to get Jesper Wallstedt. He's regarded as the number one goalie in the draft right now. In 22 games in the SHL, he had a 2.23 goal against average and a 908 save percentage, which is pretty good for a professional league in the SHL. So this is a guy who could definitely jumpstart getting that youth movement going and starting the rebuild. A guy like this and be like, hey, we only have Martin Jones for just this 2021 season. Then after that, he's a free agent. So after that, we can really move on with this guy, Jesper Wallstedt, and really rebuild some of our depth and some of our potential depth in our young guys and just work to get slowly away from these old contracts.
Yeah, Matt, so you mentioned rebuild, and you mentioned trying to get some of the older guys out earlier. Do you have any trade proposals that you think that the GM over there in San Jose might try to make here? Do you see any of those guys walking out the door via trade?
I see one guy that I think they definitely could look to trade, and I think it is Brent Burns, but they're definitely going to have to retain salary. I think retaining up to the full amount of 50% is probably what's going to have to get it done, and maybe even have to add a draft pick on. And I look at a team who was a little bit disappointing, got bounced in the first round this year. It was 25th in the penalty kill, which one bright spot for San Jose is that their penalty kill was pretty good this year. It was near the top half of the league. I think that has to do with a lot of the defensive play of Brent Burns and him being a decent two-way defender. And I think that team is St. Louis. I think St. Louis is a team who really needs more depth on the back end. They lost Pietrangelo going into the season, a big story, obviously, but they bring in a dude like Brent Burns, and they bring in a guy who can really replenish. Yeah, being at 36, he probably doesn't have that many miles left, but if you're only retaining, you're only paying $4 million for Brent Burns, and if he can give you what he gave San Jose, which is, 29 points, I'm pretty sure? 29 points this season, and pretty good defensive play. He played a lot of minutes on the penalty kill. I think that's a guy who can definitely jumpstart their team on the back end and can give them good production on both sides. I want to hear what Jake has to think about this, though.
What would the Blues be giving up for Brent Burns?
I'd say
Do you have any
it
thoughts on
definitely
that?
have to be like a pretty late pick. Like, I seriously think it'd probably be Brent Burns in like a 4th for St. Louis is like 3rd or 4th or something like that. Like something like just to get the salary cap off because he still has some value. Maybe it's like St. Louis sends over like maybe a 4th and it's Brent Burns in like a 5th or a 6th the other way. I think that probably gets it done, but I mean, with the amount of money he's making, even retaining salary, that's still $4 million for a 36-year-old that St. Louis has to take on. So there's going to be some risk involved.
Yeah, Jake, as the St. Louis Blues fan, what do you think of Burns coming over and helping to potentially kickstart the back end over there in St. Louis?
As a fan, I don't think I would hate that because that's a pretty big hockey name. It would put butts in seats for a while, anyways. But in terms of actual production and team fit, a couple years ago, sure, that would have made sense. Please do it before you bring in Justin Falk. But now we have Justin Falk, we have Torrey Krug, and we also have Vince Dunn, who they're trying to move out as of now. So I think there might just be too many offensive defensemen in St. Louis to where I personally love Vince Dunn. Sure, let's have Justin Falk and Torrey Krug and Brent Burns and Vince Dunn all hang out. If we can keep them all, I will be happy. But it looks like Doug Armstrong is already trying to shop out Vince Dunn. And if he's getting rid of Vince Dunn, I don't think there's any chance he brings in Brent Burns.
Jake's a little side note, a little bit of a tangent here. Who do you think that St. Louis might bring in to fill that gap with Vince Dunn if it's not Brent Burns?
I still think that Doug Armstrong thinks that Colton Parayko is going to be this like elite stud defensively, and there's been sparks of Justin Falk also doing decent offensively, but then other times he's just gone. I don't think Doug Armstrong has a clue what he's doing anymore. After that cup run, he kind of freaked out, and so I couldn't tell you what he's doing. I think if you brought in somebody like Dougie Hamilton, that would be kind of cool in free agency, but yeah, Brent Burns, I don't think he comes in.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of teams are going to be eyeing Dougie Hamilton out there on the market. So whoever is going to get him looks like they're probably going to be dishing out some serious cash for that guy. So hey guys, obviously San Jose, they're in a serious salary cap situation. Are they just going to have to ride this out? I mean, that's what it kind of sounds like from what we've been talking about here. What are your guys' thoughts on that? Are they just going to have to ride this out and wait to rebuild until they can get some of that cap space to open up?
I mean,
Any of you can take this question.
Yeah, that might be their only option here. They can't just dump all those contracts. I think if you could move either Erik Karlsson or Marc-Edouard Vlasic, either one or both, whichever, just get some of that cap space free and use that to sign some depth pieces and especially a goaltender coming free agency here. Yeah, I think that's a start. And I think it might be possible to trade Vlasic. If you would have asked me that a few days ago, I would have said no chance. But they probably could have gotten Caleb Jones in a third from the Duncan Keith trade that just happened.
Yeah.
But I think there's an option out there for them if they wanted to move Vlasic.
Makes sense. Matt, do you have any thoughts to what Jake just said there?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think another guy you could add in there is definitely, if he has a bounce back here, which I'm not saying he will, but say Martin Jones starts playing well, with him being on a 1-year deal, you could definitely trade a guy like him at the deadline, I feel like, if you want to go towards that rebuilding route and you want to bring in like another guy to play backup until you're ready to trade him, as long as he's playing at a decent level. I mean, that's definitely $5 million you get off the books there. But you probably have to wait till the season for that. So other than that, I agree with everything else Jake said.
Yeah, it looks like the GM is just going to have to take whatever he can get when he can get it when it comes to clearing up some of that salary cap space. So, hey, let's transition here and let's talk about the future and look towards next season. Who do you guys think is going to be the best player for the San Jose Sharks next year? I know we've talked about Evander Kane a little bit. Is that the guy that you guys think is going to shine for the Sharks next season?
Sometimes I feel like you just read my script beforehand. That's my player. I mentioned it earlier. He had a lot of distractions this year, everybody's trolling him because he had a little bit of a gambling problem. He probably still has a gambling problem, let's be honest. But I think he can bounce back. They can just tuck it under the rug a little bit. And if people kind of quit mentioning it, he can focus. He can just play hockey, which is what he wants to do. And if he put up almost a point per game this year, I said it earlier, I think he could be point per game next year, which would be huge for San Jose's offense. So my pick is Evander Kane, MVP for the San Jose Sharks next year.
Matt, how about you? Do you agree with Jake, or do you have someone else in mind?
I do think Evander Kane, like I said before, he's going to have a really good year. But I think his center, and Thomas Hertl, is going to have a really good year. I think he was a guy who played a lot with him last year, and with his success, I think bred a lot to what Evander Kane was able to do on the outside there. And Thomas Hertl is a really good player for this team. I've already talked about his stats earlier, 43 points in 53 games. He's a really good guy for them. He's a young guy, too. I mean, he's only 24 years old, which is kind of crazy to think. So he's a dude who they can definitely see as a future franchise player for them. And they already have him on a pretty decent contract as well. So I really believe Thomas Hertl is going to be their best player next year.
Interesting stat for Thomas Hertl, who I just looked at his thing here. Not bad points, but also he was a +1 on the San Jose Sharks.
Pretty good.
Yeah, and he's only $5.625 million, which is a value deal for him.
Yeah. Hey, I like both those picks, and honestly, I'm kind of torn as to who I think is going to be the guy, especially with the new coach walking in the door. I mean, let's not forget to mention that. I think that system change can definitely be very helpful for San Jose, and I think that the guy that's going to benefit most is Jake, who you said, and Evander Kane. I think coach comes in and says, hey, this guy, even in this season that didn't have a whole lot of bright sides, one of the bright sides was Evander Kane and his play and the ability to score. And I think the coach looks at that and just continues to work on making him the superstar of that team. But Matt also, I mean, with Thomas Hertl, I think that guy is also going to be right up there with Evander Kane and likely on the same line if I had to guess, or working together in some way, shape, or form. So that's my pick. So let's talk about where we think they're going to finish in the division next year, which is a struggling Pacific division, if we're being brutally honest. So Matt, let's go back to you. Where do you think the Sharks are going to end up in their division next season?
Well, I think a big reason why the Pacific looks like a struggling division is teams like San Jose. I mean, teams that really aren't going anywhere. There's a couple teams like that in this division, and they're definitely one of them. I don't see them getting much better. I mean, from what we talked about with their cap situation, there's not a whole lot they can do to add talent. So I see them probably getting worse. Honestly, you're probably saying about the same or getting worse, but I still see them in last place in the Pacific. And I don't think it's going to be much of a contest for them and the team above them.
Yeah, Jake, what about you? Where do you have them ranked?
Well, one thing that we didn't really touch up on is who I think they'll bring in free agency. And I mentioned earlier the goaltending situation it's messed up right now. I think they bring in Peter Mrazek, who had a .923 save percentage and a 2.06 goals against average for the Hurricanes. He made $3.125 million last season, so he's not super expensive. At this point in his career, he's just trying to keep a job at the highest level in the NHL. And Nedeljkovic just kind of took his job in Carolina. And so I think Mrazek takes a chance in San Jose and can really backstop that team. With that said, I still think they have a pretty bad year. Their core is aging. They've got a bunch of bad contracts, so they can't make a lot of moves. And I think they finish either 7th or 8th with some of the other Pacific teams, depending on which ways they move this offseason.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, although I will say that Mrazek definitely deserves to play in the NHL with numbers like that, and I think he will. And San Jose is a great fit. I mean, obviously the goaltending was subpar this season. Martin Jones not playing his A game, so it makes a lot of sense from that perspective. We'll have to see what happens with their cap situation if they in the market for Peter Mrazek over there. But I have to agree with you guys. I have San Jose at the bottom of the Pacific Division. But like you said, Jake, the offseason is going to make a lot of difference as to where these teams finish. I just think some of the other teams in the Pacific have younger cores that are going to improve this season, and I don't know how much San Jose is going to be able to improve. However, they do have a new coach. They're going to have a new system, so things could get a little bit revamped, but I think the contracts and all that salary cap is going to hold him down. So, hey, any closing thoughts before we wrap up this video, guys?
None from me.
I'd just say,
All right, Matt.
For San Jose fans in general, be ready because it's going to be rough. It was rough for you last year. It's probably going to be rough for you this year, but hopefully, I mean, with having a GM as long as they've had since 2003, I mean, 18 years with that same system, maybe you look somewhere else and hopefully maybe eventually you can get a new guy in there, but it's definitely going to be an uphill battle for you guys, so just hang in there. You'll get better.
Yeah.
One last thought before we close this up.
Yeah.
San Jose Sharks, 2019. It was a hand pass, and I don't feel bad that we injured half your bench. That's all.
He's referring to the Blues game back in the 2019 playoffs, in case y'all were wondering. All right. Hey, thanks, guys, for tuning in. Again, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up if you're still watching this video. Let us know how we're doing in the comments below. We'd really appreciate the feedback, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Winamac Hockey.